Thank you very much indeed. So it's actually very nice to be back in a city where I did my first degree, and it wasn't in anything technology related. It was up the hill in the geography building. So don't ask me anything detailed on technology, please. So I work for an organisation, a company called Arup, which I guess many people have heard of. If you haven't, Arup employs about 13,000 people worldwide. I guess we're known for building buildings, really, and structures. Sydney Opera House, the Bird's Nest Olympics building in Beijing, etc., etc., etc. But Arup recognised some time ago that digital was going to fundamentally change how those structures are designed, how they're maintained and operated, and established something called the Advanced Digital Engineering Group, which now is about, I don't know, about 1,000 people globally across Arup. And I sit within that group and I lead the cities team in there. So you will recognise straight away that there's not technology involved in that. It's much more the policy strategy one within me. And the other thing about Arup actually is interesting, obviously we've got an office here down the hill, is that it's employee owned, and some people describe Arup as being the John Lewis of consulting, but it has a material impact, that does. So in terms of the work that we do, my team does, we support cities and national governments in helping them harness digital technologies to deliver better outcomes to those who live and work in those locations. Before I joined Arup about 4 years ago, I'm afraid I worked the other side, and I lived the other side of the hills, they're nice, and worked for a guy called Howard Bernstein, who at the time was Chief Executive of Manchester City Council, and led a lot of the Future Cities programmes for Manchester. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a little bit of context, if I may, around some of the work we've been doing around cities in general, and then I'm going to delve a little bit more depth around a particular discipline that we're seeing a lot of activity, including in this city, which is what we call digital master planning. And that's, I guess, about how master planning and developers are starting to harness technology to deliver more competitive developments. Okay, so you've got to start with, well, you don't have to start with quite, do you? But anyway, I'm going to do this. Some of you may have seen this before. I really should take the slide down, really, but it keeps going up and again and again. So this is a man with a cigar called Cedric Price. He was an architect in the 60s, British architect. And he recognised technology was fundamentally going to change how we lived and how we worked in our cities in the future. But he also made a fundamental point, which we keep coming back to in our team. So this is really about, okay, so technology is going to answer a lot of our problems. What actually is the question? What's the question it's trying to answer? So rather than taking a solution-based approach, it's much more about thinking, so what are the challenges that we face in our cities and our rural areas? And starting from that point as opposed to the technology piece. And what's fundamentally this about for the city's agenda? It's not about a left field hobbyist activity. It's got to be fundamentally about this. It's about improving productivity and competitiveness in those locations. About mainstreaming digital activity in social care, health services. All the stuff that cities have to do. We did a report 2 years ago, which I think is still really pertinent and relevant. We reviewed 21 global smart city strategies. Don't ask me why it's 21 and not 20. I can't remember, it's lost in the mist of time. But there were 3 reasons, really, that cities are starting to develop their own digital smart strategies. And the first was really about delivering better outcomes for those who live and work in the cities at potentially less cost. The second was really about that productivity argument, generating growth and jobs, not just within the technology sector, but critically across all sectors. And the third was around citizen engagement. I think we'll take that further in terms of something around actually collaboration. So those are the kind of the 3 areas that we identified, and I guess nothing amazing though. So in terms of some of those outcomes, we started to see initiatives. This is probably an old slide really. The work that's been done in New York here in terms of Link NYC. We've seen quite a few cities now starting to generate, in my own city, Manchester, sort of a Wi-Fi mesh across the city to enable that better experience. We're seeing around productivity, a number of locations actually start to think about, so how big is the tech sector and how do we support its growth? And of course other sectors as well are starting to think increasingly, I guess, around the skills agenda. And the third area is really around collaboration. This is quite a nice slide actually in many ways. This is in Lille in France. So they, like many local authorities, collect data on air quality. And where does that data end up? On the local authority's website. Who goes on to the local authority's website by 7 in the evening to see what the air quality was like? Nobody really. So this was a way of them engaging, I guess, with the local community, but thinking of digital as a kind of an engaging play thing. And they actually lit up the trees of the local park, blue being good, red being bad, on a particular day. And there's obviously a nice link there, going back to my O-level biology, the alveoli of the lungs and the trees being lung city, etc., etc. So, you know, there's kind of a nice piece, I think, going on there as well. What I would also say in that report is we didn't do anything, and I was using the word crass here, as producing a league table of those 21 cities and who was the best, who was the worst. I find it incredibly patronising actually, because cities start from very, very different places, different contexts, and have very different challenges. But what we did find is there are kind of 3, I guess, waves of this smart city thing going on, and they're not necessarily sequential. So the first wave is around, and these are on my holiday slides, I've never been there, was around big tech companies delivering big city operational systems. And one great example of that, of course, is in Rio, where IBM invested in a big operating system because it worked for them, because they had an Olympics and a World Cup to deal with. So while they had that big scale commercial development with some and a big company investing in that, what it did do, the flip side of that rather, is that it stifled and didn't engender the innovation piece in the ecosystem, which I guess you guys are all part of in this city. Second wave, I guess, flipped that a little bit, and it put control back in the hands of local authorities and cities, and a lot of this came out of work from the European Commission, and that's not a political point, but it's absolutely relevant, in terms of driving a whole range of demonstrator projects in a number of cities, and very much more of a citizen-centric focus around that. So whilst that drove innovation, I think the flip side of that, it was public sector money, public sector funding, and I guess those of us who've experienced that know that unless there's enough thought about what you do at the end of it, the project stops. So I think the challenge with that particular wave has been how do you continue this initiative? And then the third wave we're seeing is around, and you'll all be completely aware of this, is around new startups using data within the city to generate new business models. Uber, Airbnb rather, being classic examples of that, of course. We'll see a lot more of these. The challenge, I think, for cities there, and Airbnb are a really great example, is how do they, with their housing allocation policies in that particular example, deal with very, very quick, agile moving models. So that's a quick fly through the context piece. And what I want to talk a little bit more now is about digital master planning and what we're seeing and how we're seeing digital deployed within that process. And this really came to light 2011, so I'm pleased after 2007. And it was in Christchurch. Now they had obviously a unique set of circumstances, didn't they, after the earthquake there. But there was a chance that they again, going back to the Cedric Price piece, they recognised that digital was going to fundamentally change the way people lived and worked in that city. So they had a unique opportunity to start to think about what did digital could do for them. What sort of connectivity do they need? What sort of data do they need to be collecting to generate more informed decisions, be it across energy, water, or whatever? And that's been taken a step further to other places. This is Songdo in South Korea, which at one point was labelled the poster child of smart cities by some people, probably Cisco. Cisco in the room, so this was a 40 billion investment by a number of large tech companies, and using Songdo as a place, I guess, to test out their technology. And the reality is this. It took very little, if no account of citizens' needs, people's needs, requirements, wants, desires. So when you're getting a place with words like lonely, I kind of think that's probably not the place you want to be living or working. So that's the flip side, I think, of some of this smart city agenda. It's not putting the citizen, I guess, at the heart of the thinking. So what we are seeing is kind of taking this digital master planning piece a bit further. It's being very much at the heart of what a lot of cities are wanting now, are these innovation districts. Everyone wants an innovation district. And that's absolutely right. And you know, what we're seeing, this one's actually planned, questions. Where's that? Stockport. But this is their plans for an innovation district, you know, just the railway viaduct there, you know it. But it's about thinking around, so what are the economic assets, what are the physical assets, but critically, what's the connectivity between those from digital that will drive that innovation and growth. Oh, blimey, that's quite a bit funny, doesn't matter. This is kind of our approach, Arup, and I'm not going to do a sales pitch, I'm going to fly through this, but just to give you a sense of kind of how we go about doing this. There's a kind of a first phase really around digital discovery, so that's articulating with the key partners. And because we're working in cities, we're not just talking about the local authority, we're talking about the energy company, we're talking about the water company, health providers, which makes it incredibly challenging. I was talking to some people earlier about this, incredibly challenging working in cities. Not like the rail sector or the aviation sector, it is much more straightforward. So getting them aligned around vision and goals, understanding what the socio-economic piece is around that context, creating a kind of an indicative list of sort of digital services and applications that could be deployed, which could be around concierge services, energy, transport, and then a high-level infrastructure plan. What's the sort of digital infrastructure that would need to be relayed upon that? And then we take that a little bit further to start to look at those solutions. That's the second block there. Start to think about more detailed stakeholder engagement, and in that we kind of create user profiles, either real people's lives, what's they doing from 7 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night or beyond, nighttime economy, and what might be the digital interactions that would make those points of their lives much more valuable, worthwhile, or better, a better experience. And those can be real people, sitting them down in a room like this and going through them, what they're doing, or they could create, you know, user profiles, of course, as well. And then it's only the third bit then we start to think about the digital infrastructure, but also critically, because these things cost money, what's the business case for some of those actual interventions, what's the return on the investment, and what's, of course, the roadmap for delivery. So that's kind of a fly through how we at Arup start to approach digital master planning. But I hope what you've taken away from that little piece is that people are at the heart of this, really, absolutely critically, and not the technology. I'll go through those in more detail. In the interest of time, I'll flick on to just a couple of examples. So we're seeing this in backstage, rural and urban areas. This is the Gilson Park Estate, which is one of the new garden towns. There are 9 of them, possibly across the country, being developed. So it's a new development, primarily residential. So we're starting to think about sort of the digital layer that underpins that development and how that can add value to those people's lives and people who are going to live and work there. Interesting location, actually. It's between Cambridge and London. So you've got, you know, what's going on in Cambridge and London, so you've got the research and you've got the investment community. So there's an interesting place for them to play within that. Another one in Cardiff, so this is the development of a new transport hub, and again an opportunity to sort of connect some of the buildings there with the public realm to make that a more interesting environment where people can sit, work, play. And this is in Manchester, this is North Campus, the old UMIS site, which is the site of a new, huge 1.5 billion regeneration scheme to create a new innovation district. So again, digital fundamentally critical to that. So the last few slides, kind of a fly through what does this look like in reality. This is actually in Melbourne, but don't worry, that could be in Sheffield, I'm sure. It's a pretty crap piece of space, undervalued in terms of its economic value, social environment, unless you want to leave your car out there during the day. So the first point around, I guess, digital master planning is putting that digital backbone, which enables you to then have that 2-channel way of communication, either from be public authorities to people, telling them, asking them what they're doing, finding out how they're using that space, but also for people using that space to be able to relay back to public authorities what's good, what they like, what they don't like. And from that you can then start to create interventions. So let's take, this is a mobility one, a cycle lane. Traditionally, for those of us who worked in local authorities, we put cycle lanes where the road was wide enough to have a cycle lane, as opposed to where cyclists might actually be cycling. So you can actually start to collect the data from cyclists, and Manchester did this with the motorbike failed initiative, but they did collect the data from cyclists, where the cyclists were going, and started to think about, well, therefore we need to put cycling infrastructure where the cyclists are going. Other options you can start to think around is a local shuttle bus that could be creating agile and flexible around when people are actually travelling to that particular location at the beginning and at the end of the day. And if you find that people are, stood waiting or stood at a particular point, why not put a bench there? You can collect this information, this data from people. And then start to move on to greenery. How do you create a more interesting space? So you can just go and plant this stuff and put it out there, or you can ask people through digital social media, what do they want, do they like it, what would they like more of, and where would they like it. And over time, you create quite a different space, this environment, which arguably has a much more stronger value in terms of its economic vibrancy, its social vibrancy, and of course environmental as well. We see things here popping up, pop-up cafes. Again, something of testing those out with people. Is this something you want with the playgrounds and the cafes? And would they want more of them at a particular time?
Thanks very much, Steve.